Rob Zama is the field evangelist. And so the three of us will be some of your presenters during the week here. And so I want to make sure you understand that the presentation you're about to hear from Andy is part of a series that is happening in this room. And you're invited to be part of the whole series. You're invited to invite your friends to come as well. And so here's a big picture of what's going on here in this room. And if you want to take a picture of this slide to know what to expect, you're welcome to do that. But right now, this morning, we have Andy Villanueva. He's going to be sharing with us about every church being relevant in their community. We sat down as we were preparing for camp meeting, and we decided, that these are three pieces that we would just really love it if every church had these components. Can you imagine what that would be like if every church was relevant in their community? Can you imagine what that would be like if every church in the Oregon Conference was effective in online ministry? Now, that's a challenge, isn't it, for many churches? Can you imagine what it would be like if every church in the Oregon Conference was vibrant in Jesus and in mission? That's exciting to think about, isn't it? And so that's the series that Rob, Andy, and I are doing here, and you can see that Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon. Rob will be talking about online ministry. And then Thursday morning, I will be sharing about the importance of having mission in your church, a focus on mission and having Jesus be the center of that mission. And then on Thursday afternoon and Friday morning, we get the grand finale with Richie Halverson, who's coming to share with us. And he's going to be our main speaker in the evening meetings every night. And so we're so blessed to have him here in this room for the final two presentations this week. And Richie Halverson, for those of you who don't know Richie, he is the new Church Growth and Revitalization Director for the Southern Union. And he's a friend of ours. We've worked with him before, and so we're so delighted to have him coming out to share with us as well. So like I said, you picked the right room. This is a lot of actions happening here. If you have a heart for mission, if you have a heart for evangelism, then you're in the right place, and we're so glad that you're here. We hope that you will join us, not just for this presentation, but for the entire experience. You're certainly invited to do that. So once again, our speaker for this presentation is Andy Villanueva. He is our Associate Director for the Outreach Ministries Department. He wears many hats. He serves helping out with the Adventist Community Services for the Oregon Conference, as well as disaster relief, disaster response, and also he helps out with a passion for literature ministries and for the Youth Rush Literature Ministries program for the young people as well. So he does many things for us. We're so glad to have him on our team, and I have to tell you, he's affectionately known among our team as the food connoisseur. So if you need some good places to eat around here, just ask Andy. He knows all about that. So Andy, I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to share with us. Let me have a word of prayer before you come up to share. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this opportunity we have to come together and worship you here at camp meeting, and we're so excited about being able to learn and to share about Jesus and about mission. And as Andy comes and shares with us about how we can be relevant in our communities, I pray that you would fill him with your Holy Spirit, speak through him to us today. We love you, and we thank you for answering this prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Tim. I'm so happy that each one of you is here this morning, and hopefully we'll be able to see you in the upcoming presentations as well. So Tim did a great job introducing. I always like to brag a little bit. I just have a 5-month-old girl as well. That's a new development, and so nights have been getting much better. I've been getting a lot more sleep recently. So that's been a huge blessing, a big part of my life at the moment. So as Tim mentioned, right now, this presentation is really going to focus quite a bit on community service, and I think it's a big part in being able to connect with our community. So I just want to share a quick story of a pastor who decided to meet with his church members, and he was very intentional with inviting church leaders. And he had a couple questions, but one of his main questions that he had for them was, I would like you to visualize our church for the next 5 to 10 years. What is it going to look like? What does it look like to you? And a few minutes later, you have some church members raising their hands, and there was a church member that says, you know what, Pastor? about a year, I would really like to see an updated equipment set up for our church, with good audio and great video production. And pastor says, okay, good. Another church member raises their hand and says, Pastor, I just noticed coming in this morning in the parking lot, my truck was a little bumpy. I think we should really look into repaving our asphalt in the parking lot. So the pastor took that into consideration and said, okay. And then finally, another member raised their hand and said, Pastor, in 2-3 years, it'd be great if we had a brand new kitchen, just remodel it. I mean, imagine the counter space and the amount of tortilla chip bowls for the haystacks that we could fit in the counter. And I got to show you this stovetop. I mean, we could heat up a lot of big franks in there. And so this was kind of like the conversation that the pastor was having with some of his church members. And, he came to the realization that oftentimes, when we think about the church, we visualize it as a box. And that everything that should happen should be inside of the box. But the reality is that we are called to go out to the people. We are called to visit the church outside of the walls. And I want to look briefly at Luke chapter 14 of Jesus, giving a quick example of something like this. In Luke chapter 14, verse 16 through 21, it says this: a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. At the time of the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, "I have just bought a field and I must go and see it. Please excuse me." Another said, "I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me." Still another said, "I just got married and I can't come." Finally it says, the servant came back and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and ordered his servants, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame." It's interesting to see the invitees turn down this invitation for this banquet, for something that for an excuse that maybe they felt was much more important. If you look at some of the excuses, again, they were probably excuses that were focused on their personal investments, excuses that were focused on their capital gain or their enterprise or even their familial status. But likewise, in the same manner, Jesus invites us, each one in this room, to go out into the streets, to go out into the alleys, into the neighborhoods, and into the communities, and to tell everyone of a banquet that we can experience with Jesus. So it's time to excuse our excuses. Now, my dad, he raised my brother and I. I'm the youngest one of 3, but, I grew up in a home where my brother and I just were balls of energy. And so my brother and I watched WWE wrestling. Not sure if you guys are familiar with WWE wrestling growing up back in the 90s. And so we just had so much energy that oftentimes we would take the couch pillows and just put them on the ground and do a lot of moves that my mom was not always excited about. And so my dad realized quickly, I really need to just get the energy out of these boys. And so my dad would take us to the local high school track and he would say, "I want you to run 5 laps around the high school track." And so we did. Then he would get his the gloves, the baseball gloves, and said, "Let's throw some baseball around." And he did, and so he would keep us busy, and I think it was really wise of him to do that so that we wouldn't hurt ourselves playing, wrestling. But one of our favorite activities actually was the nice, settled, gentle moments of fishing. Now, granted, we had no idea what we were doing. My dad had no clue how to fish. We would go to a local park that had a pond or something. We would just cast our reel out there. And it was just really nice just having that experience. Okay, not so much running and doing all this, but it was just kind of nice to fish. Several years ago, I met a friend, and he told me about his fishing experience and how he really got into it. And for me, I thought it was just super simple. You just get what is it called? I'm trying to remember. A rod, maybe at the secondhand store or something. But he really explained the science of it, this friend of mine. And so he said that you got to take everything into consideration. The rod, the reel, the bait, the time of the day, everything. And so he says that if you don't take those things into consideration, if you're not intentional when it comes to fishing, you're going to have very, very little results. And so that applies likewise to our community, that we need to be very intentional about getting to know our community. Now, this friend that I just mentioned, he invested quite a bit of money, and he purchased a stack of books like this just to learn and understand the principles of fishing. And I believe that we also need to take the time and effort, energy to invest in getting to know our community, and also to create opportunities for our community to get to know us. So we're going to be looking briefly at discovering the needs of the community. Here in a few seconds, Tim is going to come up and talk with us about this amazing resource that our department has access to. It's called Percept demographic data. So we're going to be looking at that here in a few seconds. And then I'll be covering a little bit about community surveys. And as Tim mentioned earlier, one of my background, my passions is literature evangelism. So I'm a strong believer of going into the neighborhoods, knocking on doors, and engaging people through conversation. And lastly, visiting with other community leaders. So stick around for that, but at the moment, I'll just invite Tim to come up and share with us on Percept demographic data.
Thank you, Andy. Yes, so the Percept demographic data is a tool that is available to you in your churches through your pastor or head elder if you don't have a pastor currently. And so we want you to know about this tool, and if you're interested in using it, talk with your pastor and encourage him or her to connect with us, because we can make this available to you that way. So the Percept demographic data is a tool that, as Andy said, allows you to understand your community. There's a Bible verse in the book of James that says we ought to be quick to hear, right? Slow to speak, slow to wrath. And God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? We're supposed to make sure we're listening. And sometimes we skip that step, don't we, when we try to reach our communities. And so I'm going to be sharing more about this with you tomorrow morning, but there is a really powerful tool, a powerful guideline that our churches are using now, and it's called an Evangelism Cycle, a 6-phase evangelism cycle. And so tomorrow morning, I'm going to be sharing more about this with you. But right now, I'm wanting you to understand how this Adventist Community Services approach and how the Percept demographic data fits in the bigger picture of a journey that a church can go on with their community. And so that has to do with, we call it the fertilize phase of the evangelism cycle, and it really has to do with giving value to your community. And that's really what Jesus did, right? If you look at the ministry of Jesus in the Gospels, you can see that he had a healing ministry, didn't he? He gave value to people, and that value that he gave to them, it opened their hearts to want to know more about what he had to say and what his teachings were all about. And so you can see that journey that Jesus went on with people, with his healing and teaching and preaching ministry that he had, and how the value that Jesus gave people opened doors to relationships and spirituality. And I believe that we are called to follow the example of Jesus. Amen? Aren't you so excited? We don't have to come up with it all on our own. Jesus gave us the example to follow. And so I want to share with you one of my all-time favorite quotes from the book Desire of Ages. Talking about Jesus, it says this: "From his earliest years, he was possessed of one purpose. He lived to bless others." Isn't that amazing? I say, if it was good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. And it's good enough for you. And so I believe that everything we do as a church and as individuals, as we seek to share Jesus with others, ought to be in this context, from this lens, from this angle of how can we bless others. And Adventist Community Services is a great way to do that, to bless others. And so that's the question that we're really asking, is what meaningful value can we give to our community? Sometimes we sit down as a church and we might say, well, what can we do to reach our community? And we'll have different ideas, and we might pick something that we're passionate about, and then we wonder why it's not as successful as or effective as we might hope. And it all has to do with scratching where people are itching, right? Sometimes we do these efforts, we do these initiatives without first taking the time to learn and hear from our community as to what their needs are, what their pain points are, and what would really be most meaningful to them. And so we're, in a sense, shooting in the dark because we haven't taken that time to get their input and their feedback before we plan what we're going to do to reach out to them and to give them value. So taking the time to listen really makes a difference. And so we've found, and we've seen it time and time again, when a church takes the time to understand their community and then intentionally creates resources and value to give to the community that's relevant to their specific needs, when you can find a match between the needs of the community and the resources of the church, that's where some powerful and exciting momentum can begin to take place as a church builds that relationship with their community. And so as Andy shared, we want you to know that Percept demographic data is a powerful tool that's available to you, but should be one piece of a puzzle, a piece of a bigger picture as you try to discover the needs of your community. There are different ways you can do that, and Andy will share some of those other ways. But Percept demographic data is one way that you can do that. And it makes me think of this quote from the book Evangelism that says, "We are to study the field carefully, and are not to think that we must follow the same methods in every place. Whatever may have been your former practice, it is not necessary to repeat it again and again in the same way. God would have new and untried methods followed." Have you ever asked a church board or some church leaders, well, why do we do things this way as a church? And you got the response, well, that's just how we've always done it. Well, we're told that we shouldn't just do what we've always done. We should try new and untried methods. And so that's what I think of when I think about listening to our community and intentionally giving value to them. So the Percept demographic tool, it allows you to define an area, a geographic area that you are interested in learning about. So that can either be a zip code or multiple zip codes, or it can be a set mile radius around an address. And so the address is usually the location of your church. And so you can choose by zip code or by a mile radius which area you want to define as your study area. And so we often encourage you to think about the area that you want to reach, whether that's through a mailing or some brochures for an upcoming event, whatever it might be. Whoever you're really trying to focus on, what your target audience is, you can define that. And so I'll give you an example quickly here. This is something we did for the Sandy Seventh-day Adventist Church just recently. So we put in their zip code, 97055. It gave us the population of 20,000. And there are a number of different pieces that we highlighted for that church to see about their community. The actual reports there's tons of data in there. And so if you like numbers, if you're a detail-oriented person, you can knock yourself out with all the detail that's in the reports that come through. But we like to highlight, for some of us who are more visual, some of the highlights, the main pieces to look at. So one of the pieces it shows you is the ethnicity of your area. Again, if it's the mile radius or the mile, the zip code. In this case, it's the zip code. So in that zip code, that's what we're looking at. So all the data you're about to see is for that defined audience. You can see the ethnic breakdown there. I'll just go through these quickly just to give you a taste of the kind of data that you can see. It also gives you a religious preference indicator, and this is in correlation to the national average. And so people are often fascinated to find out, like for Sandy, for example, 430% higher preference for the Mormon faith compared to the national average. So that's one way to look at the data, comparing it to the national average. Another way to look at the data is not comparing it to the national average. And so this is another example of this is not compared to the national average. This is just simply a makeup breakdown of the community. And you can see the red there is the same Mormon faith. And so you can see even though it came in at 430% higher than the national average, it still made up about 9% of the overall makeup of the community. Does that make sense? So it gives you different ways of trying to understand your community and different angles that you can look at it, which will mean different things for you. Another way you can look at the data is the concerns that they might have. So for the Sandy area, again, this is compared to the national average, 23% higher concern about dealing with divorce compared to the national average. 22% higher concern about parenting skills compared to the national average. 19% higher concern about achieving a fulfilling marriage and achieving educational objectives. We could go down the list, but you get the idea. What I love about looking at this data is as you take the time to listen to your community this way, you start to see a picture emerge of who your community is. And so, for example, in this community, when I look at this data, I start to see maybe there are a lot of struggling families in this community. If they're concerned about parenting, if they're concerned about divorce and fulfilling marriage, you can see a theme starts to emerge. Maybe there are some broken families in this community, some struggling families. And so that's something that could be helpful for you to be aware of. So the next question you want to think about is how can our church address these pain points? And we ask this question to the churches when we help them process this data. And we even will break them out into groups and say, what do you think you could do? You just saw the makeup of your community. You saw what they're concerned about. What value do you think you guys can offer them? And they can spend some time brainstorming about that. And then we'll show them what their community said they're interested in. And this is specifically in a church context. So now this is based on the data and the surveys that went out to the community. This gives you an idea of what the community said they might be interested in from a local church. 18% higher interest compared to the national average for Bible study discussions and prayer groups. 14% higher interest in adult theological discussions. 11% higher in spiritual retreats. And then notice these last two, marriage enrichment and parent training programs. So you can start to look at what the community has said they need, what the church has to offer, and try to find a match between those two. And so now you're no longer shooting in the dark. You have some information to go off of. And then take the time to have that conversation of how can we meet those needs. And you want to discover the needs of your community, but you also want to discover the resources of your church and what you have to offer. Who has what passions or gifts or skills, talents, experience, calling, and how can we find a match between those resources and the need of the community? So again, that's the question we're asking. What gifts does the church have that can be used to meet those needs? Ultimately answering that question, what meaningful value can we give to our community? So I hope that's helpful for you to know about the Percept data. There's a lot more to know about it, but that's just a brief overview. And again, we encourage you to utilize this resource. It's available free of charge to your church through the Outreach Ministries Department. And we found this to be a great conversation starter with community leaders, or even if you're doing a survey of your neighborhood. Andy will talk about some of these things. You can use the data you see in the Percept demographic reports as a conversation starter. Hey, I've heard that this community really is concerned about having fulfilling marriage. I'm just wondering, have you seen that in your experience in the community? Can you see how this can be a great way to start some conversations and collect multiple data points, multiple data reference points, so that you can have that more complete picture. So I hope that's helpful for you to know about the Percept demographic data.
Thanks, Tim. Another resource that's connected with Percept is Ministry Match. Now, Ministry Match actually is a great tool that shows, programs that the church currently offers and see if that matches with the interests of the community. And this is actually kind of what the survey looks like when you go online. It asks a yes or no question, if these are things that your church currently offers. So there's 17 general categories, and as Tim mentioned, that this resource is really used even to have a conversation, discussions within your church leadership, with the pastoral team. And again, these resources are something that we have access to. We'll give you information at the end about how you can connect with us so that you can get that through your pastor. So the reason why also we decided to use Sandy is because the three of us live in Sandy. And so I wish you could have said we planned that out, but I'm glad that we all live close by, because that gives us a chance to do some activities together. So we use Sandy as an example, and just show you really quick what actual interests are kind of sparking there in Sandy. So I kind of just put no for everything. I'm not the pastor of the Sandy Church, just a citizen of the community, but I just put no for all of it, just to kind of out of curiosity, just to see, okay, what does Sandy want? And Tim mentioned a little bit, but average, I'll just go through it really quick. To average, personal family counseling, adult theological discussion groups, and then below average, we have daycare programs, food and clothing resources, active retirement programs, church-sponsored day school, divorce recovery, care for the terminally ill, cultural programs such as music, drama, arts, etc., spiritual retreats, and 12-step recovery programs. So again, this just shows you kind of like the average and below average. But I'm really interested to know, what is my community really interested in? So we have here 6 that are really, really high up there. So first one is sports or camping programs, marriage enrichment opportunities, parenting training programs, Bible study discussion, prayer groups, youth social programs, and family activities and outings. Now, just kind of looking at some of these interests, I quickly realized that there are 3 out of the 6 that are focused on recreation: sports or camping, family activities and outings, and youth social programs. And I think the reason why that is because Sandy is the gateway to Mount Hood. And Mount Hood, you have a lot of outdoor activities. You have Sandy Ridge, which is really popular spot for people that love to mountain bike. You have the ski resorts, trails, and things like that. So I think that's why the community is really interested in something with recreation. And then you go into personal development, such as marriage enrichment opportunities, parenting training programs, and then finally the Bible study discussion prayer groups. So just really interesting to see, and as Tim showed, what the national average that's compared to. It's really good information to see overall. I'm curious, just wondering, from this group, are there a number of you from the same church? Like, do you have one or two, or is every one of you representing a different church? Seems like it. Okay. Just out of curiosity, what churches are you guys from? Bend, Dallas, Whipple Creek, you said? Okay, great. Okay, White Salmon. Okay, good. So would any of you be interested in me just typing in your zip code and seeing what are some interests that you might have? Okay, well let's do that briefly here. Let's see. All right, so I saw you nod your head from Bend, right? What's the zip code of your church? And I guess for anyone else that would be interested, just try to locate your zip code of your church or city where your church is at. 97701. All right, let's see where it takes us. It's loading up right now. So yeah, you can either search the city or the zip code. So let's pull it up briefly. 97701. So let's look at the very high. We have sports and camping programs, marriage enrichment opportunities, parent training programs, youth social programs, and Bible study discussion groups. And let's just look at the bottom 4, starting with 13. Church-sponsored day school, divorce recovery, care for the terminally ill, spiritual retreats, and the 12-step recovery program. Anything that stands out to you from this? Or is it just good information for you to have? Yeah, good question. So the Percept demographic book, that resource, it has all that information of where this information is received by. So one of them is the Census Bureau, right? Do you remember the other 2? Yeah. Exactly. So that's a great question. So again, that Percept workbook will have all that information of where they're getting this information. Okay. Is there anybody else curious to try? Okay. I saw a hand in the back. Okay, that's 97367. All right. Let's see. Okay, so let's look at the above average briefly. Sports or camping programs, adult theological discussion groups, active retirement programs, Bible study discussion prayer groups. And just for the sake, let's look at maybe the bottom four. Below average, we have 14. Food and clothing resources, daycare programs, 12-step recovery programs, and church-sponsored day school. Did you say command? Okay, there we go. Anything that stands out for you from what we're seeing here? Retirement area? Okay, yeah, that. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Mm. Yeah, and Rob and Tim, I'll let you chime in as well if you have any answers to that. And also, just we'll save questions at the end, but I believe Percept demographic, the booklet actually has more information about that, doesn't it?
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, you're saying, what if you have maybe some conflicting data or, you know, yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that question because, that's a common piece of feedback we get whenever we share the data is basically, in a sense, one way or another asking the question of, how trustworthy is this data, or how much weight do we want to put on this data? And so that's why we like to stress the fact that this is one tool of many. So we don't see this as like the answer for all your community, awareness approaches, but we do see this as one tool in your toolbox that you, again, you take a look at this and then go do your own survey of your community surrounding your church. Go talk to your community leaders and see what they're telling you and see if it matches, or it might give you an interesting insight that you might not have expected. So. Ah, yes. Okay. Right. So again, yeah, so the actual data that we give you is like a lot of pages, and it has those specific numbers in it. It will give you the specific breakdown. And so the national average is one way that we're looking at it. But if you want more information, it is definitely in the reports. We're just kind of giving you a quick overview, kind of look at it. So anyway, great questions and comments. I know Andy has a lot more to share with us. So keep thinking about your questions and comments. Write them down if you need, and we can revisit them at the end. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, again, Ministry Match is part of the Percept data, and a lot of it is just referenced from the booklet. So some questions, obviously, for you to consider and just think about, looking at some of this information. What steps can be taken within your church to meet the interests of your community? What external opportunities are there to meet people, to meet these interests? And when I mean external, I mean just outside of the church. An example is maybe funding or building relationships and partners with other nonprofits or local government. And then lastly is perhaps you have a ministry which does not appear to address the interests of your community. What are long-term ramifications or implications of that? And so it's really important as we look at process a lot of the information from the Percept book is just ask ourselves those questions. Are we meeting the needs? As Tim mentioned, are we scratching the itch, right? So why is it important for us to understand or even be aware of the interests of the community? One of my favorite quotes is in Ministry of Healing. It says, Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed his sympathy for them, ministered to their needs, and won their confidence. Then he bade them follow me. That's a quote that we often, refer to and hear about Jesus' ministry, about mingling with people, showing sympathy and winning their confidence, building that trust. And then at the end, he says, "Follow me." And there's so much from this quote that we could unpack, but I like to point out it continues. And this is, one of my favorite parts. In the next page, it says, "There is need of coming close to the people by personal effort. If less time were given to sermonizing and more time were spent in personal ministry, greater results would be seen. The poor are to be relieved, the sick cared for, the sorrowing and the bereaved comforted, the ignorant instructed, and the inexperienced counseled." You see, Jesus' ministry, he saw the importance of personal ministry. And much of what our communities are facing, throughout Oregon Conference, even beyond, is what we're seeing here. We're seeing people that are struggling with poverty and health decline, emotional and physical anguish. So it's really important for us to just engage with our community, to understand those needs. And so next, I want to just share with you a couple steps on ways that we can engage the community. So the first one is get to know the community, point blank, especially if you don't live in the community. Oftentimes, I think most churches, a lot of people commute into their churches. Isn't that right? And the community is aware of landmarks. They're aware of the McDonald's in their community. They're aware of the Taco Bell in their community. They're aware of the church in their community. And they know what those fast food places, what kind of service they provide. But what is that building? What is that church doing for us? And so it's really important to especially if you don't live in the community and you just commute in, to understand it. And one way of getting to know the community is what we just mentioned, is the demographic reports, Percept. And if there's any other demographic reports that you're aware of, go ahead and use them. Another one is connecting with schools. This is such a great key of understanding the community, connecting with schools, with teachers and principals, with district administrators, because they have a better understanding of really some of the needs of the community. There was a pastor in a church that decided to do just that. And through meeting with the principal connected with the teachers, and he gave them a list of names of students that their families were under the poverty line. So what the church decided to do is have some bags of food and also filled up backpacks with school supplies and share that with the kids and the families. And that made a huge impact in their lives. So just by doing something like that, connecting with the local schools. Another way is being able to attend community board meetings. Get to know people who have a deeper knowledge and understanding of what the community needs. These are people that don't just live there, but they're giving their time and effort to serve their community by being part of these board meetings. Number 2 is attend clergy council meetings. This is a great way to network and create partnership opportunities as well. There's a pastor, actually several pastors here in the Oregon Conference that I know that have connected with local pastors in the area to pray over the community, to walk through the community, and to see how they can benefit from each other as well. Number 2 is get to know the local government and community leaders. Now, these are individuals that can give you answers to understanding the needs of the community better. You always hear the saying, it's not what you know that makes you successful, it's who you know. And I believe that networking is such a big, important role when it comes to connecting with some of these civic leaders to build relationships and build those opportunities as well. And what's neat is that when you build those relationships with someone, when you make that connection, they're most likely going to connect you with their connections as well. So it's really, really key to getting to know civic leaders in your area. Some other examples is your civic leaders, as I mentioned, those that are working in your community, and even meet with the chief of police and the chief of the fire department, and even health professionals. Again, people that are on the ground. So, because civic leaders, they understand the needs from kind of a back perspective, they understand the scope. But those that are in the field, they understand a little bit more of those urgent needs. When we had the 2020 fire evacuations here in Clackamas, there was already those partnerships established way before 2020. So imagine if we didn't have the partnerships when the fires began and the evacuations needed to happen, it would be out of control. But, 5 years in the making, these partnerships were created by my predecessor, Laura Pasco. If you're not familiar with her, she's now the director at PAX. She took the time to build partnerships with the state of Oregon Emergency Management, with the Red Cross here in Oregon. She made some partnerships also with Clackamas County and other county officials. And that's what kind of paved the way for us to open this campground to 100 plus trailers to come in. And it wasn't just us running this. We also had people here on the ground from the Red Cross, from the county, from the state emergency management. So again, these are partnerships that were created through civic leaders and also those people that are on the ground. So it's really important. And another story I'll share with you, Pastor Tim Main at Tillamook, he probably doesn't mind for me to share this, but he's made some amazing partnerships within his community where he's made partnerships with the police department, the fire department, even so much that the fire department will come on their property and do some fire drills. And so they have that type of connection, and their ACS director, she's also made some additional partnerships to make their micro shelters, and I'll show a video a little later, make their micro shelters, managed by a nonprofit. So it's seriously making those partnerships with these leaders is so key. If you do have questions, I'll just save them at the end because we are being recorded, and it's better for the people that are editing the videos to just maybe cuss at the end. So I appreciate your patience. Politicians pay attention to faith communities that pay attention to the community. What I mean by this is that there's a desire for church and state partnerships, in a sense where governments are willing to give grants, to faith-based communities to aid at-risk youth, prisoners, elders in need, the homeless, substance abusers, and welfare to work families. So what to do when you meet a community leader? So let's say that you've made some appointments, with maybe the mayor and some city council. So what do you do? So I just gave a couple points, the questions that you might be able to ask them. So first of all, you can introduce yourselves and briefly explain your purpose. Learn more about our community and discover there's a way you can have a greater role in it. So obviously you want to state why you're there. Next, how long have you been part of this community? It's really important not just for you to show up and just share your story, but get to know their story as well. Why do they serve? And maybe what's something that they're passionate about that they want to see as well. Ask, what changes have you seen during that time? What strengths do you see in the community? What would you like to see different? Is there anybody else you would recommend that we talk to? Thank you for your time, and leave them your contact info and send a follow-up email thanking them for their time. So making sure just appreciate the time that they give you, because their time is really valuable, and they probably don't get a lot of things either, especially working for the government. So making sure to do that. Now, if you already have a particular ministry in mind to meet the interests of the community, this is something that you can also include people associated with that field in the slate of interviews, and that's something that you can ask the leader that you initially meet. Include a question or two related to what you're thinking of doing, and as the idea develops, then share the idea and ask their opinion and suggestions. So again, it's that partnership mentality, right? You're not just there to get something out of them, but also share your story and have them share their stories. Next way to engage with the community is look to deposit before you withdraw. This is such an important leadership principle as well. You see, community engagement is about building relationships. I don't know about you, but I don't know of any one-way relationship that is healthy. So it's important that in these relationships that you're listening to the person, the other person is also listening to you. So make sure that you take the time to deposit into those relationships. And what is an example of depositing into those relationships? If, for example, I have a relationship with maybe the Red Cross, I want to make sure that I'm depositing by coming to an aid or volunteering for a disaster response that is currently happening. And then they're aware of my presence. They're aware that I'm trying to help with anything disaster related. And through those partnerships or through that deposit, I'm able to withdraw in the future where knowing, where I could tell them and say, hey, here in a year, we're preparing to do this big training. Would you mind coming and training my people? That's how those deposits and withdrawal relationships work. The next one is walk the community. Now, if you're walking and you're out there, might as well make it into a prayer walk. This practice allows you to pray over the community while seeking conversations with people as God brings you across their path. These conversations not only help you to get to know people within your community, but could also lead to divine appointments. And so just walk your community, right? Get to know the people and possibly have those great conversations to understand some of their needs. As you're walking the community as well, there's three things that I put here briefly. As I mentioned, I have a background of literature evangelism, and it's not an easy thing. Knocking on doors is tough, people. Like, you're going to get rejected and all kinds of rejections. It's G-rated and everything rated. But when I have the opportunity of knocking on doors, once I'm off the vehicle, I try to use my senses. I try to look at the house and see, okay, there's kitty litter there. There might be some kids there or, in that home. Okay, there's a couple broken down vehicles in the driveway. Okay, that gives me a sense as well. There's a really nice, beautiful cookie cutter home with a nice lawn. And so those things kind of allow me to understand my community a little bit better. Now, smell. Now, I definitely did not like this part, especially before lunch, because I could smell some good barbecues happening in the community. And so smell what's going on. You smell food. You smell carne asada. Like for my Hispanic community, that's what they love to cook. They like to do carne asada. So it smells like that in the air. And here, what are you hearing? Are you hearing children cry and play? Are you hearing the sounds of laughter and joy? So it's important as you're walking the community to take these things into consideration. It gives you credibility. As you're walking into the community, again, having conversations with people, they're going to ask, you questions. And you can tell them, well, actually, I attend the church here in the community. So it gives you credibility. A quick story, there's a pastor in Indio, California, who was not just a pastor, but he was also a volunteer police officer. Now, what he would do, thought it was genius, but he would actually put on his uniform and he would go around the corner into his community and start knocking on doors, talking with people and just saying, I'm the pastor local area and I just want to connect with you. I want to connect with you, pray with you. And he's actually had families that he's met at the doors and he's brought them to church. And so they were able to become a part of that worship experience. And number three, it just gives you a new perspective. As I said, many church members do commute into the church. I'm one of them. My church is about 35, 40 minutes away from my home. And so, but walking into the community gives you a perspective that this church isn't the whole city, but there are other people that are being impacted by the building and the members and even the traffic as well. So at this moment, I'm going to ask Rob if he could pass out this survey, and I'll go through it briefly, but this is something that you can use when you go back to your church community. The Windshield Survey. Now, first thing I want you to do with this specific survey is that when you are taking notes, make sure to take observations at face value. So what does that mean? Do not make assumptions or interpretations of the community, okay? Just take it at face value, and that's it. What you can do is you could drive through the community, or again, make it a prayer walk. It's a great opportunity, again, just to, when you go to your church, just do this Windshield Survey and just take everything at face value. And that at least gives you some information of the DNA, a little bit about the community that your church is currently part of. And finally, number 5 is open your church doors to community activities. You see, most of our churches only use the property and its resources twice a week, maybe three, right? Sabbath probably all day, and then you're looking at Wednesday for prayer group, and maybe Friday, right? But that's about it. Those are the only days really that our church and resources and properties are being utilized. So use your properties and assets for community service engagement. I'm going to share with you briefly this video that you might have watched yesterday for the offering appeal, but it's about the Tillamook Church with Pastor Tim Main and Donna Parks as the ACS director. Let's skip that part. No necessary to see me twice, right? I mean, that's such a powerful way of how the Tillamook Church is being intentional in reaching their community, with listening to them, with building those partnerships and being able to start serving their community. Another couple ideas of urban community needs, and especially if your church is in the context of being an urban ministry, is homelessness, affordable housing intervention programs, gun violence intervention, health education center, and safe houses for abused and battered women. So ministry to the urban community is a desperate need. And so again, it's when you begin to scratch the itch, the community will notice. If we don't, we will be the church in the community. Now, what do I mean by that? What is the church in the community? Well, I'll give you a couple descriptions of the church in the community. It does not desire to influence the community. It may be described as a fortress holding the outside world back. Invests nearly all of its various resources on its own members. And lastly, it takes up space in the neighborhood Members commute into the community for services and meetings, and then they leave again. The church does not pay taxes and is a net drain on the community. I feel that, unfortunately, most churches can be described as the church in the community. A church in the community needs to be a community church first. I'll give an example of Hope Valley, the 2020 fire evacuations, where one of our pastors was able to connect with someone just down the street right here. And they met with them, and the neighbor was just telling him his story of a generation of his dad living here in Gladstone, and how much he disliked the summer during camp meeting because the water pressure was down here in Gladstone. We were causing a lot of traffic here on Oakfield Road, and so that's been the year, every year up to 2020, when all of a sudden no more camp meeting because of COVID. But our property, our church decided to open up this area for evacuees. And that neighbor just was so grateful for what we were doing for the community, that we were allowing them to come in, especially during a time that was very difficult to a lot of families. Again, it's just being community-centered first. And when we look at community service, I want you to understand this. There is no community without you. You are an integral part of the community where your church resides. Before I go, I just want to close with this story of the church in the suburbs. There's a church that was kind of in the outskirts in the suburbs on about a 0.5 acre plot. Now, the community already had some negative feelings towards the church, and because members showed up on Sabbath morning and they left sometime in the afternoon. And so one afternoon, members decided to go canvassing, wanted to do some surveying. And as the neighbors quickly found out where these people were from, what church they represented, oh boy, they started telling them what they thought. And so they started telling them, you guys are always coming and just leave. And when you leave, people come and start selling illegal substances in the parking lot. Let me tell you the reason why this was a hot spot for selling some substances. You see, the church thought as a beautiful decorative thing in the parking lot to put about 6 feet of hedge around the church. And so a car can easily just drive in and start doing unspeakable things and start selling whatever they wanted. So the church wasn't aware of it, but the community was. And so as the church members were listening to this big issue that the community had, they decided to take action. So what did they do? They decided to bring those 6 feet long hedges down to about 2 feet. And slowly but surely, no more people were coming in late at night, doing some very sketchy things. And the community was just really appreciative of the church being able to listen. So what I want to encourage you this morning is to know and get to know your community and their needs. Be a community church. Go around the block in the corner and ask your neighbor, how do you view us? How can we serve you as well? And so lastly, a coaching question that I have for you is, if your church were to close its doors for good, would the community notice? Would it be a negative impact on the church? Would it be or the community, or would it be a positive impact on the community? Our approach should be Christocentered, having Christ as a center. And through Christ's personal effort, he mingled with men, he showed sympathy, he won their confidence, and he bade them follow him. If you do have any other questions, I put my contact information there. You could write me an email. This is my cell phone number. You could call or text. And again, if you would be interested in any of the resources that we shared with Percept and Ministry Match, this is something that our department is able to share with you through your pastor as well. And so I know we have a few minutes for Q&A, and Tim and Rob would be happy if you guys came up as well if you guys want to answer anything. But if you guys have any questions, I'm not sure if we have any extra mics or anything like that. We could pass it around. Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so yeah, like you said, the Red Cross really noticed what we were doing here, and again, because of the partnerships, the Red Cross is actually the ones that made the call. It was actually the Red Cross and the County of Clackamas called and said, "Hey, this is what we need. Can you do it?" And we said, "Yeah, let's do it." So that's how it took place because of the partnerships. Yeah, little did they know that we've had some experience with running this area before, right? With golf carts and knowing the property ourselves. So yeah, the hand up there. Yeah, it's Percept. Did you want to share about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're wondering more about the information about the Percept data. So yeah. So the way I remember the name is, think about it like you're trying to see your perception of the community, percept, how you perceive your community. And then in terms of how to get access to it, go through your pastor, or if you don't have a pastor, your head elder. Our department, there's usually a cost associated to it, but our department covers that cost for your church, and so we provide that as a resource available to pastors in your church. So let your pastor know that you're interested in this tool, and have them reach out to us, and we can work with him to get you that data.